Today's video is sponsored by Nobility.co.uk, the leading company in selling legal titles in the United Kingdom. Get a 10% discount in any purchase by mentioning Death Row. As a society, we recognize that children, those under 18 years old, cannot and do not function as adults. That is why the law takes special steps to protect children from the consequences of their actions, and often seeks to ameliorate the harm caused when children make wrong choices by giving them a second chance. The law prohibits people under 18 from voting, serving in the military and on juries, but in some states, they can be executed for crimes they committed before they reach adulthood. The United States Supreme Court prohibits execution for crimes committed at the age of 15 or younger. Before 2005, 19 states have laws permitting the execution of persons who committed crimes at 16 or 17. Since 1973, 226 juvenile death sentences have been imposed. 22 juvenile offenders have been executed and 82 remain on death row. Before 2005, few juveniles have ever been executed for their crimes. Even when juveniles were sentenced to death, few executions were actually carried out. In the United States, for example, youths under the age of 18 were executed at a rate of 20 to 27 per decade, or about 1.6 to 2.3% of all executions from 1880s to the 1920s. This has dropped significantly when only 3 juveniles were executed between January 1977 and November 1986. In 1642, the Plymouth Colony in Massachusetts executed Thomas Gronger, making him the first juvenile offender put to death in the American colonies. Between then and the March 1, 2005 U.S. Supreme Court decision in Roper v. Simmons that ended juvenile executions in the U.S., 365 people confirmed to have been juveniles at the time of their offense were executed. That total constitutes 1.8% of the roughly 20,000 confirmed American executions since colonial times. 22 juvenile offenders were executed in the United States in the 3 decades between the Supreme Court decisions upholding the constitutionality of capital punishment in 1976 and the execution bar announced in Roper. Those 22 executions comprised about 2% of the executions carried out in that time period. All but one occurred in the South, and all were in the states that comprised the former Confederacy. Internationally, the execution of juveniles is largely considered inhumane, anachronistic, and in direct conflict with fundamental principles of justice. The International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights bans the execution of juvenile offenders. Although the United States has signed the ICCPR and therefore agreed to be bound by its standards, the U.S. has reserved the right to execute juvenile offenders, as long as our Constitution is interpreted to permit the practice. Before 2005, of the 123 countries that currently use the death penalty, only the United States and Iran impose death sentences on juveniles. Ironically, many of the countries that the United States government regularly criticizes for human rights abuses have abolished the practice of executing juveniles. For example, between 1994 and 2000, Yemen, Zimbabwe, China and parts of Pakistan amended their laws to prohibit the execution of juvenile offenders. In continuing what is universally viewed as a barbaric and uncivilized practice, the United States has, over the past decade, executed more juvenile offenders than every other nation in the world combined. The death penalty for juvenile offenders was banned by the Supreme Court in 2005. Out of the 22 people that were executed for crimes they committed when they were under 18, death row kids. Sean Richard Sellers, born on May 18, 1969. On September 8, 1985, 16-year-old Sellers and his then best friend, Richard Howard, killed Robert Bauer, a convenience store clerk in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Sellers later admitted on his website that he killed Bauer because the man had refused to sell him beer and because he wanted to see what it felt like. He surprised the Circle K convenience store clerk while he was drinking coffee, then pursued the wounded man across the store and shot him again. On March 5, 1986, Sellers killed his mother, Vonda Bello-Fato, and his stepfather, Lee Bello-Fato, while they were asleep in the bedroom of their Oklahoma City home. Sellers tried to disguise his guilt by arranging the crime scene to look as if an intruder had committed the killings. At his trial, Sellers claimed he was a practicing Satanist at the time of the murders and that demonic possession made him murder his victims. His attorneys also argued Sellers was addicted to the game Dungeons and Dragons. The jury refused to believe either claim, and he was sentenced to death in 1986. At the time, Oklahoma law did not give juries the option of giving a life sentence without the possibility of parole. One juror later said that the jury felt Sellers would be paroled in 7 to 14 years, and this prison term was not lengthy enough. So the jury opted for the death penalty. Other jurors denied this was part of the deliberations. Howard testified that just after the murders, Sellers had come to his house and told him that he had killed his parents. Howard was also initially charged with first-degree murder, but the state dismissed the charge and recommended that he be given a 5-year suspended sentence in exchange for testimony against his friend. By his own admission, Sellers committed the murders as a practicing Satanist. At the time of his trial, his defense argued Sellers was addicted to the game Dungeons and Dragons and had no control over his actions. At the time of his execution, Sellers contended he was the victim of a multiple personality disorder. Sellers was executed by lethal injection at 12:17 a.m. on February 5, 1999. He spoke to his step-siblings, saying, "All the people who are hating me right now and are here waiting to see me die, when you wake up in the morning, you aren't going to feel any different." Sellers did not mention his mother or apologize for what he had done. His statement outraged his step-siblings. Noelle Terry, his stepsister, later said, "He basically addressed the fact that we would still feel the same. It is very presumptuous that he would know how we would still feel." His last words were a modern Christian music song, "Set my spirit free that I might praise thee. Set my spirit free that I might worship thee." Sellers was the 13th execution of murderers who were under 18 years old at the time of the murder, and the first in 40 years for one who murdered at the age of 16. Glen Charles McGINNIS, born January 11, 1973. On the afternoon of August 1, 1990, Homer Burson walked into Wilkins Dry Cleaners in Conroe, Texas, to pick up some cleaning. He waited at the counter, but no one approached to wait on him. He left, then re-entered with another customer. Finally, noticing that the cash register was open, Burson walked around the corner of the counter toward the back room of the store where he discovered Letta Wilkerson lying face up on the floor, her eyes open and her body covered with blood. Burson immediately notified the police and called for an ambulance. Wilkerson, who was employed at the cleaners as a clerk, was transported to a nearby hospital where she was pronounced dead on arrival. She had been shot once in the face and 3 times in the back. Upon arriving at the scene, investigating officers found spent .25 caliber bullets and bullet casings lying on the floor near where the body was found. Officers also discovered blood on the front counter next to a pile of jeans with the name McGINNIS written in the pockets. The telephone on the front counter had been left off the hook. Objects were in disarray, and about $140 was missing from the cash register. Additionally, police were informed that the 1985 silver-gray GMC minivan the victim had driven to work that day was missing. 2 individuals picked Glen Charles McGINNIS out of a photographic lineup, identifying him as the man they had seen at or near Wilkins Dry Cleaners around the time of the offense. Late that evening, police found Wilkerson's minivan abandoned in the parking lot of a nearby shopping center. Between the 2 front seats of the van, they discovered Wilkerson's wallet, from which investigators lifted McGINNIS's fingerprint. The following morning, 3 employees of various businesses in the shopping center where the van was found picked McGINNIS out of a photographic lineup as the man they had seen the afternoon before requesting assistance. Because his van was broken down. Early on the morning of August 2, 1990, police were dispatched to Williams Square Apartments, just 2 blocks from Wilkins Dry Cleaners, where McGINNIS was thought to be residing with his aunt, Annette McGINNIS. Police arrested McGINNIS for the capital murder of Letta Wilkerson and transported him to the police station, where they discovered $105 in his possession. Later that morning, police returned to Annette McGINNIS's apartment to search for a .25 caliber weapon. Annette McGINNIS told police that her nephew had been living with her in the apartment since July 27, 1990. On October 8, 1990, McGINNIS was indicted in Montgomery County, Texas, for the capital murder of Letta Wilkerson, while in the course of committing and attempting to commit the offense of robbery, which occurred on August 1, 1990. McGINNIS was tried before a jury upon a plea of not guilty, and on July 23, 1992, the jury found him guilty of the capital offense. On July 30, 1992, in accordance with state law, the trial court assessed McGINNIS's punishment at death. McGINNIS appealed his conviction and sentence to the Court of Criminal Appeals of Texas, which affirmed on December 14, 1994, and denied rehearing on March 1, 1995. McGINNIS then filed a petition for writ of certiorari to United States Supreme Court, which was denied on October 2, 1995. A man who was just 17 years old when he murdered a Montgomery County mother of 2 was executed Tuesday, January 25, 2009. In the moments before his execution, Glen Allen McGINNIS, 27, lay silently strapped to the death chamber gurney with his eyes closed. He gave no final statement. As the lethal drugs began flowing into his arms, McGINNIS' chest heaved and he gasped slightly before falling into unconsciousness. McGINNIS was pronounced dead at 6:17 p.m., 7 minutes after the flow of lethal drugs began. McGINNIS' execution was the 6th that year in Texas. He was the 8th juvenile offender executed in Texas since capital punishment resumed in the 1970s. Thank you for watching Death Row.